got Gary Thacker joining us now, author of Beautiful Bridesmaids Dressed in Oranje. Welcome back. It's Ray Hudson, me, Kevin Egan. Gary, absolute pleasure to have you join us here on the Football Show this morning. We're going to talk a little Netherlands, who are in the Group C with North Macedonia, Ukraine and Austria as well. First of all, congratulations on your book. Ray's just received his copy recently. I look forward to reading it as well. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Thanks, Tim. Great to be on board, mate. So thanks for inviting me. The book basically it concentrates on the Dutch teams of the early 70s, so particularly the 74 and 78 World Cup and the 76 European Championships in between them. But basically, it's a situation where the Dutch national team hadn't qualified for a World Cup tournament since 1938. They played in the second and third tournaments pre-war and lost every game. So when they went into the 1974 World Cup as favourites, crazy. They hadn't even qualified for 30-odd years. And when they beat Bulgaria in their opening game, it was the first World Cup game they'd actually won. And, of course, they went on to get to the final, lost to West Germany in that game where Egan scored in the first minute. And they played probably the best football you've ever seen in a World Cup. Wonderful, wonderful team. Cruyff and Egan, Rensen Brink, Pete Kaiser, Rudy Krol, Serbia, wonderful team. And then going to the 76 tournament where again they were favourites to win, and they lost out to the Czech team who eventually won it in 76 without playing a penalty. Cruyff wasn't fit, and they played the howling gale and rain and lost out. And then in 78, there again they got to the final again. So a team that had never qualified for a World Cup for 36 years got to two consecutive finals. And then, after 1978, they didn't qualify again for a World Cup until 1990. An amazing story.
Wow. It looks like an amazing book, first of all, Gary, and congratulations. This is no slight read if you are a lover of football. This is a must-have book. If you love anything about the game, what you've done, Gary, is digest one of the great nations of football into this tome, with all acknowledgements, good and bad, the heartbreak and the absolute celebration of football that was taken to an absolute operatic high note and suffered demise as well, which as football fans, we all do. As you said in one of your tweets, and this pretty much puts a beautiful lasso around it, is indicative of this book that you've crafted so beautifully. The story of a doomed beauty. Football gods with the wings of wax who flew too close to the sun. Prometheus in Oranje. They had the gift of fire to scorch pitches, but perished in the flames. Absolutely wonderful, and not just empty, not just words, Gary. It's a framing, that little piece that I've just read of a country that really invented a different dimension and passed on to the world in such a beautiful way, and especially in European football, and set a standard that was almost impossible to be maintained.
Oh, bless you, Ray. Thank you for those kind words, matey. Yeah. Yes, they did. It was a new paradigm of football that they gifted to the world, and there were, they say imitation is a serious form of flattery, and there was a lot of people who imitated them, but never actually had that same effect in the end. But the legacy lives on, from Cruyff to Barcelona through Pep Guardiola, and the players who played under Cruyff at Barcelona went on to be manager. Ronald Koeman, who's now manager of Barcelona. As well, so many, and so the legacy lives on, and the whole. I'm sitting in a hotel room in Barcelona at the moment, and the whole ethos of Barcelona's system of play and the way the club's developed through the Mafia, the youth club, so the youth set up there, is very much from Cruyff, which was very much from me, which was very much from the '74 Ajax and Feyenoord teams, of course.
Is that? This can sound like a strange, but is there a weight there because of the history? You've mentioned guys like Neeskens and Rinus Michels, Johan Cruyff. Is there a weight and a pressure there that exists today with this squad because of the quality and the history?
I think there is, mate. Yes, Kevin. I was fortunate enough to get an interview with a guy called Nico Jan Hoekma, who is the director of top football at the KNV, so KNV being the Dutch FA. So he's the top head of the coaches, as it were, at the KNVB, and he said how important it is that they maintain this ethos of the way the Dutch play. It's not only important to win, but it's important to win well. And there was in 1978, I think it was, Mikkels wrote a coaching manual. It's called the Eredivisie. Zeist is where the Dutch FA is based. It's called the Zeist the vision from Zeist. And this basically, in a few words, it's kids don't play football on the street anymore. So what they did was created what they call Cruyff courts around the country, especially in Amsterdam, in the bottom core area of Amsterdam where Cruyff is. So people play on concrete again, so they control the ball.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. I think that's Gary, the case all around the world.
Yeah, that's true, Kev. Under the lights, as we used to call it back in Gateshead in Newcastle, when we used to play, it wasn't the glamour of playing under the lights. It were gas lights. It weren't even halogen lights. When we got halogen lights, I remember Gary would go, "Wow, it's like playing at Wembley." After coming up from under the, but I'm very biased towards the Dutch style of football. I make no excuses about it, and certainly no apologies. I played against and with some of the great Dutch players, against Ruud Krol, Van Hanegem. What a player he was, people. What a player. Oh, Nieskens, Wim Serbia, Wim, wonderful lad. Rijsbergen, Wim Jansen. But one of my favourites of all time was Jan van Beveren. The great Dutch goalkeeper, who had a terrible falling out with Cruyff in so many ways, and you go into it in your book, and it's really Shakespearean. I remember having personal conversations with Jan van Beveren and regarding his exclusion from the Dutch team for both World Cup finals. Was that how much of an issue was that missing? For me, he was Cruyff in goal. That's how exceptional Van Beveren was, but he didn't play in the finals. He was excluded from the Dutch, and it's part of this wonderful book.
At the time in the 70s, Jan van Beveren wasn't only the best goalkeeper in the Netherlands, he was the best goalkeeper in Europe. By a country mile, the best goalkeeper in the Netherlands, and he'd had an injury, played for PSV Eindhoven, and he had an injury towards a couple of months before the end of the season. And he came back and he played a couple of games before the season finished. And Mikkels, who'd been parachuting as coach in 74, wanting to prove his fitness, he arranged a late practice game. I think it was against Hamburg, a German club side. And Van Beveren didn't really want to play and risk his fitness. And Mikkels said, "Well, if you don't play, you're out of the squad." And so he got kicked out. So the Dutch instead, chose a goalkeeper who'd played one international game 12 years ago, all 5 minutes, and had conceded a goal in that 5 minutes. It seems crazy. The one thing about the Dutch ahead of a World Cup, they're always going to turn the table over and create a havoc, because that's what they do. Yeah. And of course, he missed out again in 78 because he fell out with Cruyff, as you say quite rightly, Ray. And crazily in 78, a guy called Jan Zwartkruis was coach up to the final, and he tried to get Van Beveren back because he knew he was a great goalkeeper, but Cruyff played his face, and in the end he tried to bring him back to keep him on the bench to keep Cruyff happy, but Van Beveren understandably got fed up with it and retired, and ironically Cruyff didn't go, so Van Beveren could have gone, but a terrible hard luck story about such a great goalkeeper, you say, right?
Yeah. Gary, what's the view of Frank de Boer in Holland, in the Netherlands? Because around the world we all know what it's like. The successful time at Ajax was one thing, then obviously Crystal Palace, before that Inter Milan, Atlanta United. I witnessed it firsthand. I'm based in Atlanta. I got to know Frank a little bit. It wasn't all bad, I'll tell you that much. He actually achieved certain records in Major League Soccer, wins while not conceding, things like that. He won the Campeones Cup and the US Open Cup, but overall, it was probably a failure, given that he was fired a year after taking over. What's the view in the Netherlands, and why was he given that job?
I think the answer is unproven, or yet to be proven, shall we say. He's probably how he's viewed at the moment. And if Koeman hadn't decamped to go and manage Barcelona, there's no way De Boer would have had the job. But the Dutch have a history of this sort of thing. For instance, when they gave the job to Ben's going to be dead. Excuse me. I couldn't be the guy who managed Barcelona afterwards. Kluivert, sorry, Kluivert, forgive me. He had one season managing a Dutch club. It was Sparta Rotterdam, and he got them relegated. And he got the Dutch international job. Marco van Basten, when he got the Dutch international job, had one season managing Ajax's youth team.
Wow. Okay.
So picking an ex-player, and this is something that the guy I mentioned earlier to you, Nico van Hoekmaal, the KNVB guy, said they're always very keen to get ex-players in to coach, because if you're coaching an international team, you're going to teach a player to trap a ball, you're going to teach a player to pass. You've got to set the theme for the team. You've got to set your tactics, pick your 11 starters and your subs, and away you go. And it's all about inspiration.
Well, I tell you, Gary, it's I can't wait to read it. It's my summer read, and I've just bought a lovely, nice new house. It's on a lovely lake, and I'm going to have the Euros on, and I'm going to be watching the Dutch, and I hope Ukraine actually beat them in their group. That's who I'm taking. But just because of some crazy stuff in my head, but in the Dutch manner going forward in this tournament, star players, dependable players, and inspirational players. Who do you think is going to be able to come out of this team and really put a mark on the tournament? Anybody in mind? And how do they compare? And is there any way of comparing to the glory days? You talk about the glory days for all sorts of countries, but like I say, I'm so biased towards the Dutch and what they have given the world of football. But I'm hoping they're going to be able to come through in better, brighter colour. But as you say, they have a way of tripping themselves up too many times.
Yeah, if I'm going to pick a potentially star player from that Dutch team, it'd have to be Frenkie de Jong. Aside from Messi, he's been exceptional for Barcelona this season. Koeman's even played him in a libero role a couple of times, and he looked exceptional. Running forward with the ball, he's got that Cruyff sway about him. He doesn't necessarily triple pass players. He almost just sways away from them as he's running. So I think Frenkie de Jong would be the guy to look out for in this tournament from the Dutch, and it could be his sort of hello world, his my name's Frankie moment. But I don't think you can really compare this team to the Dutch team of the 70s. Very much like, it was a gold generation. You just realised some great names there, Ray. I mean, but they were 11, well, they were 12, 13, 14 fantastic outfield players who were performing for the Dutch in the 70s. They might have 2 or 3 players now. I think that's the difference. It's a bit like, the Hungarian side of Puskás to Guti. Across this, that tremendous amount of players of the golden generation. You don't get too many golden generations, not even in the Oranje.
No, but you think about the golden generation of earlier on this century. I mean, that was a golden generation. When you think about this, I remember they didn't make the Euro, they didn't make the World Cup, right? Or was it 2002? They missed out on the World Cup, and they had a strike force. I'll never forget it in Dublin. They had about 6 strikers on the pitch at one time. And they had, whether it was Hasselbank, Van Hooijdonk, Ruud van Nistelrooy, Kluivert, and they had Overmars on the flank. And they threw everything in the kitchen sink at Ireland, and Ireland just about managed to win that game thanks to Jason McAteer and a 1-0 win. But that was a golden generation in many ways. And then the later years, obviously Wesley Sneijder and getting to a World Cup final. To not be in a tournament for the last 7 years is simply staggering given the talent level there. And now you look at this side. At the back, De Boer's teams over the years, they've never been too shabby defensively. I look at what he's done for Miles Robinson, even in Atlanta here. At the back, you still have a guy like Matthijs de Ligt. But going forward, the pressure is heavily on Memphis Depay, isn't it?
Most assuredly. I mean, the teams you mentioned there, I mean, did have some great players, but they didn't have 12, 13, 14 great players. I mean, the Dutch team of especially 74 and 78 to some extent as well, as the other young players coming through, they had a squad that were all exceptional. And the generation of you just mentioned, they had some really good, outstanding players, but world stars, 4, 5, perhaps not a dozen, not 14, 15. But yeah, I mean, you say about the defence. The defence has always been sounded before Timothy Liggett's outstanding defender. There is a lot of pressure on Memphis. There's talk over here actually about him going to Barcelona because he's up for a free transfer, I think, from his French club. But the question is, Barcelona have got to have this group together at the moment, and they've got more debt than the third world country. So whether they can afford to put enough money together for his wages is a different matter, but that's the talk over here in Spain.
Gary, regarding this wonderful book, I'll tell you again, people, Beautiful Bridesmaids Dressed in Oranje. Did you come up with the title, first of all, or did Polly, your wonderful wife? Was it, how much of a pain was it to write? Because this is such a celebratory story of our game, the Clockwork Orange, and yet there's so much sadness linked to it. It must have been a hell of a trip into this book, because this is not just a shallow book. This is a deep dive into everything. And I just want to give a line here in one of the passages of this wonderful book that I cannot express to all of our listeners out there to buy it, to not just read the snippets of it online, but to buy this book, and you will learn and you will glean from it. One day in the not too distant future, a new Oranje will follow that trail. But instead of the beautiful bridesmaid dressed in orange, they'll be the beautiful brides. I only hope that I'm there to see it. Wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Right, yeah. The title actually, it came to me. I was doing a podcast. I do a lot of podcasts with a group called These Football Times over in the UK. And we were talking about how the Dutch missed out, but they weren't the brides. And the title actually came to me in that moment, that these were the beautiful bridesmaids. You go to a wedding, and sometimes the bride isn't always the most beautiful.
Yeah.
The bridesmaids
been there, Gary. Yep.
You know what I mean?
Been there too.
That's how it came to me. So yeah, but this book for me was a labour of love. I mean, I when the Dutch were just setting the world afire in their football. I was sort of 13, 14 at the time. So just at the age where I was so influential. And it's still to this day, and here I am now, sort of, 50 years later. And I still believe that the way they play football is the only way to play football. You get your 11 best players and you put them on the park. And that's the way to make it play.
Thank you.
Yeah,
beautiful.
Well said.
Beautiful.
Well said. Pep Guardiola said he knew nothing about football until he met Johan Cruyff. You think about, like you said, the influence throughout the years. Gary, absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Gary Thacker, author of Beautiful Bridesmaids Dressed in Oranje. Top class, Gary.
Thank you, guys. Much appreciated.